You've ever played a game set in history, and then something happens that just makes you go, wait, what? Wait, did that really happen? Well, the game is literally unplayable. Or is it? Is the game unplayable? Did the game lose all its value? Well, no. However, this is a topic I feel many consumers and critics get wrong. Historical accuracy is a topic that often stirs debate among gamers. Ubisoft recently found itself in the turbulence of this debate with Assassin's Creed Shadows. The game has received heat for its playable characters. Naui,
Now
a shinobi assassin, and Yasuke, who is a samurai. The controversy for Assassin's Creed is with Yasuke. You see, Yasuke's black. Okay. Was the backlash really all about historical accuracy? No. It's the internet. People sometimes just like drama. Still, there are some valid points to it. The root of the issue goes beyond a black guy in feudal Japan. The contention is with his status or title. Was he actually a samurai? I don't know. This video is also not going to answer that question. I can't. I don't have the resources or background in Japanese history to make any conclusions you should listen to. For me, there's a much bigger, more interesting discussion. It's that gamers, critics, and developers are wrong about historical depictions of video games. There are two definitions I would like to use to describe historical depictions in the media: historical accuracy and thematic authenticity. Historical accuracy is depicting events that happen in history one-to-one, where the goal is to be as close to the historical facts as possible. Think documentaries and academic literature. And then, thematic authenticity is the adherence to the themes of the historical setting, such as clothes, weapons, and other things that would fit in this setting. Or, to put it simply, historical accuracy is about the facts of the time. Thematic authenticity is about the feel and spirit of the time. Now, I'm going to go on a limb on this one, but no game is perfectly accurate to history. All historical fiction is incapable of being historically accurate by their very nature. For example, Red Dead Redemption, Kingdom Come Deliverance, and even previous Assassin's Creed games are all fictional stories set in historically authentic worlds. There was no Ezio or Altair, but they were written into thematically authentic worlds that the player was able to experience history through. Think about the original Black Ops. The first mission, Operation 40, has Mason, Woods, and Bowman in Cuba attempting to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Woods, it's been a while.
Hold on one sec. There we go. Although nothing like what Treyarch depicts, the true history is not as far off as you might think. The premise is based off a combination of the Bay of Pigs invasion and Operation Mongoose. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, which was an attempt by the US government and the CIA to stop Castro's communist revolution, Operation Mongoose was an attempt to undermine Cuba through more clandestine means. The CIA would cooperate with gambling syndicates in Cuba and get them to attempt to assassinate Castro. They would also make deals with the mafia, officials in Castro's government who were under the influence of Cuban gangs, and US-based racketeer operations to finance anti-Castro activities in hopes of securing the gambling, prostitution, and dope monopolies in Cuba in the event of Castro's overthrown. Honestly, learning more about Cold War CIA operations makes me understand wanting to reject modernity.
I hate nature! I only get ready for me!
Now, obviously Operation Mongoose failed, but imagine if the CIA got more desperate and actually did send operatives to assassinate Castro through more direct means. This is what I mean by thematic authenticity. Treyarch takes a real-life situation and expands upon it through fictional storytelling. It is still accurate to the historical setting, but it's not accurate to what happened. Another example could be Assassin's Creed 3. Connor Haytham didn't exist, but he belongs to the Iroquois, who exist, and it takes place during the American Revolution. The point I'm trying to make here is that both of these stories are historical stories that exist within the boundaries of history. Within those boundaries, they have free reign to tell stories that didn't happen. Now, Assassin's Creed goes further than Black Ops. Assassin's Creed has the Isu, a fictional alien race who fought a war with Adam and Eve, who sought to free humanity from servitude to their gods. Okay, so Ubisoft definitely took more liberty with history than others. But ultimately it doesn't matter because the game setting itself is still thematically authentic to history. Adam and Eve are biblical characters, and there is enough ambiguity or fictionality about them that Ubisoft can get away with fictional ancient alien war. The same way, I believe that Yasuke can be given the same leniency in his status as a samurai because of its uncertainty. I do sympathize with game developers who want to make games with historical settings. They want to tell a fictional story while maintaining a varying level of authenticity to the historical theme. But the difficulty comes when they also have to make the game playable. That's why there's health potions in Kingdom Come Deliverance, regenerating health in Call of Duty, health tonics in Red Dead. Now, this doesn't mean that developers should have carte blanche to do as they please with history and still be allowed the title of a historical game. Take, for example, the rebooted Wolfenstein games. Amazing games that utilize history for its setting. These games are, however, not thematically authentic as they stray so far from any historical setting to be considered that. Wolfenstein, to me, is a thought experiment into alternate realities but the consequences of World War II, like Man on High Castle. I believe there needs to be a cutoff point where thematic authenticity is no longer applicable, and Wolfenstein feels like a game that strays too far from what I believe that means. So far, I've only discussed single-player games, games where the setting, story, and theme are completely up to the developers and writers. So what about multiplayer? It's 2016, a big year for multiplayer FPSs. Overwatch versus Battleborn are fighting for the top hero shooter spot, and Overwatch won that battle because its characters were more recognizable. Okay, that's not exactly why. However, later in the year, two Titan FPS franchises were releasing their latest installments to satiate our running around and shooting addictions. Battlefield and Call of Duty. Whenever these two franchises fight, shareholders clutch their wallets in panic to see who wins. It's COD. It's always COD. Call of Duty released their trailer for Infinite Warfare, and the fans loved it. Everyone showed their support by making it one of the most disliked game trailers of all time. Another advanced movement shooter in the COD franchise meant another year of burnt-out fans looking elsewhere. Gamers were growing tired of the advanced movement mechanics of Call of Duty and wanted a
boots-on-the-ground experience. Back to boots on the ground after tradition of boots on the ground.
So how did DICE and EA respond? DICE had taken the exact opposite approach that Call of Duty had taken. Instead of the future, Battlefield was going to the First World War. This was the first time that a major franchise had gone into this setting, and there's a reason for this. Automatic weapons were not universally used. Weapon sights were limited to iron sights for the common soldier and few telescopic scopes for snipers. This creates a unique challenge for any game studio, making a game that is engaging to the Adderall-fueled consumer while still adhering to the historical context that the game wants to be set in. So how did DICE solve this problem? Well, they didn't. Okay, they did, just not in a way that would make historians happy. Instead of only implementing what was realistically used in the war, they instead implemented any weapon and technology that was in development or existed in limited numbers during the time. This way they could stay thematically relevant to the era while circumventing the issue of what existed in the war to what could conceivably exist in the war. For example, in the Western Front, instead of just having Lee Enfields and Gewehr 98s only, DICE added weapons like the MP-18 or the Hellriegel. The MP-18 never saw combat in World War I, as the war ended before any reached the front lines, and the Hellriegel only exists in photos at the Austrian National Library as a prototype that was lost to time. Even though these two weapons never saw combat, they are from the era and therefore serve the purpose of making the game more enjoyable to the casual gamer and while still fitting into the World War I theme. But the theme is more than just if it has elements from history. It's about the respect for history. Even though Battlefield is predominantly a multiplayer game, you can see the dedication that the devs had to depict the brutality of the war.
Wo die super schwere Rucksäcke auf hatten oder Eisenstangen in der Hand hatten oder Steine.
Sie haben einen Drachen! Seht ihr ihn?
Die mussten ertaten.
In Deckung! Feindliches Flugzeug! Hey, Flieger! Attacke! Vorsicht! Aufpassen! Aufpassen! Deckung! Feindlicher Landkreuzer! Und was für ein Brummer! Seht ihr, wie groß dieser feindliche Landkreuzer ist? Feindlicher Landkreuzer! Da drüben! Das Ding ist riesig!
The gameplay doesn't simulate the combat experiences of the war at all, but it captured the essence and therefore was able to capture the immersion of World War I. Battlefield 1 for me is the perfect representative for thematic authenticity. It is by no imagination perfectly accurate to history, but what matters most for the player experience is the immersion. Battlefield 1 is able to immerse the player into a historical setting and theme. Battlefield isn't the only game that is able to capture obscure historical weapons in vehicles. Take Warthunder, for example, a multiplayer PvP team killing simulator. The Warthunder community takes the historical accuracy of its in-game vehicles so seriously that it's not a question of if, but when someone will leak military documents to get the devs to make the game more accurate. Now, this game has no concrete historical setting. You can, however, select historical battles where the game restricts you to the vehicles that were used during that battle. In this case, an argument could be made that these are historically accurate, but the rest of the game that isn't historical battles would cleanly fit into the category of thematically authentic. Multiplayer matches are made up of a mismatch of era-accurate vehicles ranging from common vehicles to obscure prototype vehicles on the same team, all from different nations. Nations who may have been at war with each other with these vehicles. Imagine a team with a German Bf-109, a British Spitfire, a Japanese Zero, and an American XP-50. These are all real planes, but similar to the Hellriegel and Battlefield, the XP-50 never made it past test flights. The point is that all these planes thematically fit into the era having historical backing, even if it's a bit silly that your team setup would give Hermann Göring a stroke. This is where I'm going to start a fight with people. This game is neither historically accurate nor thematically accurate. It not being historically accurate at this point is pretty self-explanatory. Nothing that is portrayed in the game has happened in history before. However, its theme is history. That is undeniable. Where it falls short is that it is not historically accurate to any era nor faction it portrays. Because the game has players progressing at different speeds, a game could have someone in the industrial era fighting someone stuck in the medieval era, which technically is not a problem, but it again would be dependent on the faction. As well, the government system allows for you to choose your governance style regardless of what faction you're playing in. Giving America communism, while funny, has no backing in history. In a somewhat similar note, the faction you play as, some of them did not exist at the same time. How is Trajan, the faction leader from Rome, supposed to exist in the same time as Teddy Roosevelt or Suleiman from the Ottoman Empire? Now, I will say that Civilization is an excellent game, tons of fun, and a great way to start fights with your friends. But it wears history like clothes. It uses history too generously as a theme. If you remove the historical theme from Battlefield, sure, it's just any of the other Battlefields, but the immersion of the setting is gone. What I'm saying is that Civilization at its core, the history is not necessary for the game to maintain its relevancy, like Battlefield 1 or War Thunder. It is thematically authentic, but its theme is not history. It's a digital board game with a history paint job. The reason I wanted to do this video is unfortunately Assassin's Creed's departure from thematic authenticity. Assassin's Creed used to be the industry standard of historical games for people without autism. Now, I don't believe anybody was confused on the historical accuracy of the Apple of Eden in Assassin's Creed, but taking control of Altair during the Middle Ages in the Crusader states, that's here, was incredibly immersive. Assassin's Creed, just like Battlefield 1, is a perfect example of thematic authenticity. It immersed the player in a world where historical inaccuracies or historical stretches could be accepted because the rest of the setting was believable. The Knights of Templar were a real group involved in the Crusader states, although not as involved as the game portrays them. This is no different than Battlefield 1 having automatic weapons. It existed, but not to the extent portrayed in the game. Assassin's Creed took a historical concept and stretched it to create a fictional narrative. This brings me back to Yasuke. It is believable that he could be a samurai even if it's not based on concrete evidence. I said at the start of this section that Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed had strayed from thematic authenticity, but that's not exactly accurate. Assassin's Creed Shadow's performance and reception from gamers was a result of politics. Yasuke is not the first historical figure Ubisoft has used and stretched the facts of history. Take Leonardo da Vinci in Assassin's Creed 2, who gives Ezio a gun. Now, Da Vinci could possibly be credited to the wheel lock, which is a firearm, but it's not like this. My point here is that Ubisoft is not afraid to change a bit of history to fit their narrative. What Ubisoft has never done, however, is have the playable character be a real person from history. Altair, Ezio, Connor, Edward, Shay, Arno, Jacob and Evie, Bayek, Cassandra, Alexios, Ivor, Basim, and Naui. These are all fictional characters, except for Yasuke. Why? This is where I want to speculate, but I shouldn't.
I shouldn't.
Why is it that the first time Ubisoft drops their usual fictional protagonist formula, it just happens to be with a black samurai in feudal Japan? You don't have to be a marketing genius to predict the internet firestorm that followed. It practically guaranteed controversy and shot the game in the foot before it even had a chance. And let's be real, most of the people throwing fits over Yasuke don't actually care about historical accuracy. Ubisoft just handed them culture war ammo on a silver platter. The conclusion I come to is that they were so blinded by virtue signaling that they didn't see this backfiring. Now, this is where I would have told Ubisoft that it was possible for them to have their cake and eat it too. Include Yasuke in the game, but as an NPC. He can even be integral to the plot as a samurai, similar to how Da Vinci was important enough to the story of Assassin's Creed 2. Just don't make him the focal point of your marketing for the game. All Ubisoft did by marketing Shadows the way they did was invite conflict. I personally have no issues with Yasuke being in the game, as I discussed in the intro. There's enough historical evidence for Ubisoft to play around with. This whole drama and Twitter war could have easily been avoided, allowing for what could have been a cool story in Japanese history. Because at the end of the day, Yasuke is an interesting historical figure, but Ubisoft robbed the players and itself from exploring that history. The Assassin's Creed drama sparked a question in me that took a while for me to answer. What is the best way to portray history in video games? Thematic authenticity to me is that answer. Black Ops, similar to Assassin's Creed, took a historical event and created a fictional story that still felt somewhat historically immersive, even if it was a fictional story. The games do not have to adhere to history one-to-one, it just has to be close enough to the history that I'm interested. Battlefield 1 to me is my favorite example of this. In no way is it historically accurate. Making a First World War game that is a multiplayer would probably be one of the most boring games to play. DICE took the brutality and technological innovation of World War I and used it to craft a multiplayer experience that immerses you into a believable battle. It may not be a history lesson, but nothing says World War I like riding a horse into battle while dodging zeppelins and grenades.